The multiplication of loaves and fishes remains humanity's most enduring mystery about the nature of abundance and the power of collective faith. Whether miracle or metaphor, this ancient story continues challenging our assumptions about scarcity, suggesting that the greatest limitations exist in consciousness rather than material reality. What miracles might emerge if we truly believed in abundance? Stop the ride! Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with terror as the roller coaster reached the loading platform. The operator, a bored teenager with coffee breath, barely glanced up from his phone. "What's your problem, dude?" Jake Martinez, Marcus's roommate, laughed from the seat beside him. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus's hand shook as he fumbled with the safety harness. The October wind carried the scent of caramel apples and dried leaves through Cedar Point's midways, but all he could smell was hot metal and impending disaster. The track's going to collapse. Third support beam stress fractures in the welds. You're an engineering student, not a prophet. Sarah Kim rolled her eyes from behind them, her dark hair whipping in the breeze. At 19, she'd known Marcus since freshman year and had grown used to his analytical nature. But this was different. This was panic. The operator's radio crackled with static. "Thunder Mountain, you're clear for launch." "No." Marcus stood up in his seat, causing the entire row to rock. "There's structural failure in the third support beam. The metal fatigue patterns indicate imminent collapse under dynamic load." Security guards began walking toward the ride as other passengers started murmuring. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the Ohio amusement park, and somewhere in those shadows, Marcus felt death waiting. "Sir, please remain seated," the operator said, finally looking concerned. Marcus grabbed Jake's arm, his grip tight enough to leave marks. "Trust me, please. When have I ever been wrong about engineering calculations?" Jake studied his friend's face. The sweat beading despite the cool weather, the dilated pupils, the tremor in his voice. In 3 years of friendship, he'd never seen Marcus like this. "Okay," Jake said quietly. "We're getting off." Sarah started to protest, but something in Marcus's expression stopped her. The 3 students climbed out of the ride, much to the irritation of the other passengers and staff. As they walked away, Marcus kept glancing back at Thunder Mountain. The vision played in his mind like a film reel, metal screaming, gravity taking hold, lives ending in twisted steel and splintered wood. 20 minutes later, as they stood in line for funnel cake, the screaming started. Emergency sirens wailed across the park as Thunder Mountain's third support beam gave way exactly as Marcus had foreseen. 7 cars plummeted into the ravine, taking 23 souls with them. The sound of twisting metal echoed across the midway like a death knell. Marcus collapsed to his knees on the asphalt, his entire body shaking. Jake and Sarah stared at him with a mixture of awe and terror. "How did you know?" Sarah whispered. Marcus couldn't answer. He was too busy wondering if cheating death once meant it would come for him in other ways. 3 weeks after Cedar Point, Marcus couldn't sleep. Every engineering textbook seemed to contain blueprints for disaster. Every structure around him appeared ready to fail. His apartment in Columbus felt like a trap waiting to spring. The dreams were the worst part. Every night, he saw tracks, not just roller coaster tracks, but highways, railway lines, conveyor belts, all leading to the same inevitable end. He'd wake in cold sweats, sheets soaked with perspiration that smelled like fear. Jake knocked on his bedroom door at 217 Amherst. "Dude, you're talking in your sleep again." Something about velocity and trajectory. Marcus sat up, his Ohio State t-shirt clinging to his chest. Through the window, streetlights painted yellow streaks across the wall, creating shadows that looked too much like railroad ties. "I keep seeing it," Marcus said. "The pattern. It's not random. There's an engineering principle at work, like death is following the path of least resistance." The next morning brought news that made Marcus's coffee cup slip from his trembling fingers. Jake found him in the kitchen, staring at his laptop screen. "What's wrong now?" Jake asked, noting the familiar look of terror creeping across his roommate's face. "Tommy Richardson," Marcus whispered. "You remember him from the park? Sat 2 rows behind us?" Jake nodded. Tommy had been a loudmouth freshman from their dorm, the kind who always had to prove he wasn't afraid of anything. "He's dead." The news report showed twisted metal and shattered glass on Interstate 71. Tommy had been driving his motorcycle at 3 a.m. when a SEM truck, as tire blew out, sending the 18-wheeler across the median into oncoming traffic. The bike had nowhere to go. "Speed and trajectory," Marcus muttered. "Just like I've been dreaming." Sarah arrived an hour later, her face pale. She'd seen the news too. This can't be a coincidence. Marcus paced the small kitchen, his engineer's mind working through the problem like a complex equation. In thermodynamics, when you disrupt a system's equilibrium, it seeks a new balance. What if death works the same way? What if by avoiding our fate, we've created an imbalance that needs to be corrected? "You're scaring me," Sarah said, but her voice carried the weight of belief. That afternoon, Marcus received a text from an unknown number. The tracks lead everywhere. His phone slipped from his hands, clattering on the linoleum floor. Through the kitchen window, he could see the train tracks that ran behind their apartment complex, gleaming like silver threads in the autumn sun. Jake picked up the phone. "Dee? Who's Dee?" But Marcus already knew. In the deepest part of his engineering mind, where calculations became certainty, he understood that death itself had learned to text. The apartment's heating system kicked on with a mechanical groan, and for a moment, it sounded exactly like a train approaching a station. Marcus grabbed his jacket. "We need to leave. Now." "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. "Somewhere without tracks," Marcus said, though he was beginning to suspect no such place existed. The escalator at Polaris Fashion Place Mall shouldn't have malfunctioned. Marcus stood at the bottom, watching the metal steps move with mechanical precision, but something felt wrong. The rhythm was off too fast, too aggressive, like the machinery was hungry. "It's just an escalator," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. 3 days had passed since Tommy's death, and paranoia had settled over them like Ohio's autumn fog. Sarah clutched her shopping bag tighter. "Maybe we should take the stairs." "The stairs are on the other side of the mall," Jake protested. "We'll be here all day." Marcus studied the escalator's mechanism with his engineer's eye. The tension in the cables looked wrong, the speed irregular. In his mind, he could see the cascade failure, a cable snapping under stress, steps collapsing like dominoes, bodies tumbling down twisted metal like laundry in a broken washing machine. "Look at the handrail," he whispered. "See how it's moving faster than the steps? That's a sign of imminent mechanical failure." A mother with a stroller approached behind them. Her toddler giggled at the moving stairs, pointing with chubby fingers at what he probably saw as a magical moving pathway. "Excuse me," Marcus said, turning to the woman. "I'd recommend taking the elevator." "There's a mechanical issue with—" "Mind your own business," she snapped, pushing past them onto the escalator. Marcus watched in horror as they rose toward the second floor. At the halfway point, exactly where his vision had predicted, the handrail seized. The woman stumbled, her stroller tilting dangerously toward the side. Only quick reflexes and a stranger's helping hand prevented disaster. "Lucky," Jake muttered, but Marcus knew it wasn't luck. It was a warning. They took the elevator. On the second floor, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. "Momentum is conserved. Energy transfers. The equation must balance." "It knows physics," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "It's learning." The mall's atmosphere felt different now. Too bright, too artificial. The fountain in the center court created echoes that sounded like distant machinery. Every escalator, every moving walkway, every motorized door seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Jake grabbed a pretzel from the food court, but his hand shook as he ate. What if we're just seeing patterns that aren't there? What if this is all in our heads? Before Marcus could answer, screaming erupted from the first floor. Through the glass railing, they watched as an escalator near Macy's suddenly reversed direction at full speed, sending shoppers tumbling backward in a cascade of limbs and shopping bags. Security guards rushed to help the injured, while maintenance workers hit emergency stop buttons throughout the mall. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. "How did you know?" "I'm starting to understand the rules," Marcus said, watching paramedics load victims onto stretchers. "Death doesn't just want us, it wants to restore equilibrium. Every person we saved disrupts the natural order. The system is trying to correct itself." His phone buzzed. "Excellent analysis. You're learning. But learning won't save you." They left the mall through the emergency exit, avoiding all mechanical systems. In the parking garage, Marcus noticed something that made his blood freeze. Every car was parked in perfect parallel lines, creating tracks of metal and concrete that led to the street. "The whole world is tracks," he whispered. Behind them, an escalator's emergency alarm continued to wail like a mechanical siren song, calling them back to face their fate. The coffee shop on High Street should have been safe. Marcus chose a table in the center, away from windows and mechanical equipment, but his engineering mind couldn't stop analyzing potential failure points. The ceiling fan wobbled slightly unbalanced rotation could send blades flying. The espresso machine's pressure gauge read too high explosive decompression waiting to happen. Sarah stirred sugar into her latte, her hand trembling. Another one died yesterday. Marcus didn't need to ask who. The news had reached them that morning. Rebecca Walsh, the girl who'd sat in the front row of Thunder Mountain, had been killed when her bicycle chain snapped on the Olentangy Trail. She'd gone over the handlebars at 30 miles per hour, her neck meeting an oak tree with the precision of a physics demonstration. "Speed and trajectory," Jake muttered, echoing Marcus's recurring nightmare theme. Always speed and trajectory. The coffee shop's Wi-Fi password was Tracks 2023, a coincidence that felt too deliberate. Marcus's laptop screen displayed spreadsheets of their fellow survivors, tracking locations and death sequences like variables in a fatal equation. 17 survivors from the ride, Marcus said, his voice clinical. 5 are already dead, all killed by momentum-based accidents. Cars, motorcycles, bicycles, falling objects. Everything follows the same kinetic principles. Sarah leaned closer to study his data. What about the others? The ones still alive? Scattered across 3 states, but they're dying in order, Marcus said, highlighting names in red. Reverse chronological order from where they sat on the ride. It's working backward through the cars. Jake's complexion turned gray. Working backward to what? To us, Marcus said quietly. We were in car number 7, the last car to board. The coffee shop's front door opened with a mechanical chime, and a figure in a maintenance uniform entered. Something about his movements seemed wrong, too fluid, too purposeful. He approached the espresso machine and began adjusting settings. Marcus watched the pressure gauge climb into the red zone. "We need to leave," he said, closing his laptop. "Why?" Sarah asked, but she was already reaching for her jacket. The maintenance worker turned toward them, and Marcus caught a glimpse of his face, or where his face should have been. In place of features, there was only shifting shadow that seemed to form numbers and equations. "Now," Marcus shouted. They rushed toward the back exit as the espresso machine's safety valve began to whistle. Behind them, the maintenance worker continued adjusting dials, his shadow face displaying velocity calculations in flowing script. The machine exploded just as they reached the alley, sending superheated steam and metal fragments through the space where they'd been sitting. The sound echoed off brick walls like a locomotive's death scream. In the alley, Marcus's phone displayed a new message. Pressure builds. Systems fail. You cannot run from physics. It's not just following us, Sarah gasped, her back pressed against the brick wall. It's ahead of us. Setting traps. Marcus nodded, his engineer's mind working through the implications. It understands our psychology. Where we'll go, what we'll trust. It's running probability calculations on human behavior. Jake kicked at a garbage can in frustration. So, what do? How do you outrun something that knows physics better than you do? Before Marcus could answer, they heard the sound that had haunted his dreams for weeks. The rhythmic clicking of train wheels on tracks, growing steadily closer. But there were no train tracks in the alley. The sound was coming from above, where the building's fire escape created a metal stairway that looked remarkably like a vertical railway. As they watched, the fire escape began to vibrate in rhythm with the phantom train sounds. The entire city is becoming a track system, Marcus whispered. Streets, stairs, walkways, everything that provides a path from point A to point B. His phone buzzed once more. Final destination approaching. All tracks lead home. In the distance, Columbus's actual train horn sounded, calling passengers to an appointment with inevitability. The train moved without sound through a landscape that existed between moments. Through the windows, Marcus saw not the familiar streets of Columbus, but the infrastructure of destiny itself, endless tracks, branching and converging in patterns that followed laws more fundamental than physics. He sat in the same seat he'd occupied on Thunder Mountain, but now he understood that every seat on every ride, every train, every moving vehicle was the same seat. They were all just different expressions of the same universal constant, the inevitability of motion from beginning to end. The other passengers sat in perfect silence, their faces turned toward windows that showed their final moments on endless repeat. Tommy's collision played out again and again, Rebecca's flight over handlebars, the escalator victim's tumble through space. Each death was a data point in an equation too vast for human comprehension. Death moved through the car like a conductor checking tickets, its presence a distortion in reality that made the air taste of copper and ozone. When it reached Marcus, it sat down across from him with mechanical precision. "You were an excellent student," it said, its voice the sound of locomotives and last breaths. "Few understand the physics of fate so quickly. What happens now?" Marcus asked, surprised by how calm his voice sounded. "Now the equation balances. 23 died at Cedar Point. 3 were saved. The conservation of energy demands correction." Through the window, Marcus could see Jake and Sarah in their respective new lives. Jake teaching engineering at MIT. Sarah designing safer amusement park rides in California. They were alive, but changed, carrying the weight of survival like a permanent shadow. "They'll never feel truly safe again," Death observed, following his gaze. "Every ride they take, every escalator they use, every moment of mechanical motion will remind them that they cheated me once. That is their payment for continuing to exist." The train began to slow, approaching a station that looked exactly like Cedar Point's Thunder Mountain, but older, more fundamental, the original template from which all roller coasters were built. "And my payment?" Marcus asked. Death's form shifted, becoming momentarily visible as equations written in light velocity, acceleration, momentum, all the variables that had haunted Marcus's dreams. "Your payment is understanding. You see the beauty of the system now. The elegant mathematics of beginning and end." The train stopped, and Marcus could see the platform where other engineering students waited. Every person who had ever tried to calculate their way out of destiny. Every mind that had sought to understand the mechanical nature of fate. "Will it hurt?" Marcus asked. "No more than any other moment of transition," Death replied. "You are simply moving from one state to another. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed." Marcus stood and walked toward the doors. Behind him, The other passengers continued their eternal replay of final moments. But he understood now that those weren't endings. They were transformations, energy moving from one form to another, according to laws that predated the universe. The doors opened with a sound like a deep breath. On the platform, Marcus could see the construction of reality itself, the vast machinery that kept existence running along its tracks, the complex calculations that determined every moment of every life. He was about to become part of that system, his understanding of physics making him a valuable addition to the cosmic engineering team. As he stepped off the train, his phone displayed one final message. Welcome to the eternal equation. Your shift begins now. The platform dissolved into light, and Marcus felt himself becoming part of something larger, not an ending, but a transformation into the fundamental forces that kept the universe moving along its tracks. Behind him, the train departed for its next pickup, carrying its passengers toward their own moments of understanding. And in the world he'd left behind, Jake and Sarah continued living, but they would never again trust a mechanical system completely. Every escalator step, every train ride, every moment of surrendering control to machinery would remind them that somewhere in the vast equation of existence, their friend had become the variable that ensured other people's safe journeys. The tracks continued, infinite and eternal, carrying passengers toward destinations they could never imagine until the moment they arrived. Marcus stood alone on the platform at Union Station, watching snow fall through the amber glow of vintage lampposts. Jake and Sarah were gone, not dead, but fled. They'd finally listened to his desperate pleas to leave Columbus, to put distance between themselves and whatever force was hunting the survivors. He'd stayed behind, understanding with crystalline clarity that running was pointless. The messages had grown more frequent, more specific. Platform 3, 11:47 p.m. The equation completes. The station at night felt like a cathedral of iron and glass, its architecture designed to channel human movement along predetermined paths. Every bench, every pillar, every section of track served the same purpose, moving people from one point to another with mechanical efficiency. Marcus checked his phone. 11:39 p.m. He'd spent the last week studying the physics of his situation like it was his final exam. The conservation of energy required that the disruption they'd caused at Cedar Point be balanced. 23 people had died in that collapse, but 3 had been saved by his premonition. The system was trying to correct itself, eliminate the variables that didn't belong. The station's public address system crackled to life. Attention passengers. The 11:47 service to final destination now boarding on Platform 3. No such train was scheduled. Marcus had checked the timetables obsessively. He walked toward Platform 3, his footsteps echoing in the empty station. The click of his shoes on marble sounded exactly like the rhythm that had haunted his dreams, the steady beat of wheels on tracks, counting down to inevitability. The platform stretched before him, bisected by rails that gleamed like silver threads under the station lights. At the far end, barely visible through the falling snow, he could see a light approaching, not the bright LED of a modern train, but the warm yellow glow of something much older. His phone vibrated. You understand now the beauty of physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Every equation must balance. Marcus typed back, his fingers steady despite everything. What about free will? What about choice? The response came immediately. Choice is an illusion. You chose to board that roller coaster. You chose to trust your vision. You chose to save your friends. Every choice led here. The train emerged from the snowfall, a sleek black locomotive that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its whistle sounded once, a mournful note that resonated in Marcus's chest like a tuning fork. As it approached, Marcus could see the other passengers through windows that seemed to show not the interior of a train car, but the moment of each person's death. Tommy on his motorcycle, Rebecca on her bicycle, the others in their final seconds, all of them caught in the space between motion and stillness. The train stopped with a mechanical sigh, its doors opening with pneumatic precision. Inside, the seats were arranged like the cars of Thunder Mountain, and Marcus could see the exact seat he'd occupied that October afternoon, waiting for him as if he'd never left. A conductor stepped onto the platform, not the shadow-faced figure from the coffee shop, but death itself, wearing a uniform that seemed stitched from darkness and starlight. Its presence felt like standing too close to massive machinery, all potential energy and barely contained force. "Final stop," it said, its voice the sound of steel on steel. "All aboard for the completion of the equation." Marcus looked down at his phone one last time and typed, "Will Jake and Sarah be safe?" They were never part of the calculation. Only you. Only the three who cheated fate that day. He stepped onto the train.